Welcome to Happy Homes and Gardens. I'm your host. My name is Daphne Royse. I am a real estate broker, architecture, and interior designer. Wisk is the world's first autonomous flying electric air taxi. It is no surprise that Wisk will change the future of mobility. Let's welcome Mark Shikerman, Human Factors Engineering Manager at Wisk. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you so much.
Please tell us who you are and how you got involved with Wisk.aero.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. This is fun. I'm originally from Israel. I joined the Air Force there, and after learning how to fly aircraft and drones, I was able to join a team that was responsible for developing new drone technology. For example, things like ground control stations, adding more automation, improving user interface, and so on. That was very interesting, but I always wanted to do something similar in the commercial space. I decided to move to the US to pursue my MBA. And during my second year of the MBA, I was looking for opportunities where I can leverage that specific experience. It just happened that Wisk was one of those companies that had an opportunity. And of course, I gladly joined. I joined the team as human factors person. I'm sure, of course, we're going to talk about what human factors is. But yeah, that's how I ended up being at Wisk. It's been 3 years since I joined Wisk, and that's everything we do is super interesting, and I look forward to the opportunity to talk more about that.
Well, they are looking interesting to me. I have been looking on your websites, and those are very unique. No one has similar what you have. Tell us more about human factor engineering. What exactly you do there?
Yeah. So first of all, let's start with what human factors is. Human factors is really a mix. It's a mix of disciplines and areas of research. For example, psychology, ergonomics, UX, UI, physiology, etc., where the goal is basically to look while you design, develop something, a product, you want to make sure that you take the perspective of the user and you think about how they're going to use it and make sure that you eventually address all their needs. Human factors is not a unique thing to aerospace and aviation. In fact, human factors exist everywhere. I would say the difference is that if you think about, choose any product, your iPhone. When the iPhone is designed, the human factors considerations are there mostly to make sure that users have fun, it's easy for them to use the product, they are willing to pay money for the product, etc. When we come to aviation or airspace, the focus of human factors is basically one, and that is safety. I would say this is the difference between human factors in aviation versus human factors in other areas of life. And so this is basically what we do at Wisk. We have a team that is responsible for making sure that the people, the humans that are supervising the aircraft, that have interactions with systems, are equipped with the systems that allow them to do everything they need to do safely. I'll tell you more about Wisk, and that kind of will tie that back into the human factors question. So one of the unique things about Wisk is that not only we're developing an electric air taxi, but it's also going to be self-flying. By self-flying, what I mean is that we're not going to have a pilot on board. We're going to have people on the ground. We call them the multi-vehicle supervisors that will be sitting on the ground and responsible for supervising those flights in the air. So they're not pilots, but they will have tasks that remind or similar in some ways to the tasks of pilots. So we need to make sure that we give them the system, we design and build a system that would allow them to supervise those aircraft safely. Here's where human factors comes into play. We need to work very closely with designers, with software engineers, systems engineers, flight test people, et cetera, to make sure that the systems we design address exactly the needs of these specific people and allow them to do what they need to do safely First of all, so that we know it's safe, but also the next step is so that we can show that it's safe to the regulator, so that everything can be certified and we can safely fly passengers eventually.
So how much difference is between your engineer and air traffic controller doing the ground communications? Are they similar to it?
So that's a very good question. The reason I say it's a very good question is because if you think about the role of these multi-vehicle supervisors, there are some similarities, or I would say even overlap, between their tasks and the task that air traffic controllers do. However, it's not exactly an air traffic controller because air traffic controllers, eventually, they are not the pilots in command of the flights. They are responsible for making sure that the airspace is well managed, but you have those pilots on board each aircraft that are eventually responsible for the safety of the flight, and they're responsible, for example, for responding to different contingencies and issues, and they are responsible for a lot of the decision making for that specific aircraft. Our multi-vehicle supervisors, even though they're not exactly pilots, they will be the pilot in command of the missions they are responsible for. So we actually give them a little bit more responsibility over those specific aircraft than I would say than air traffic controllers. But the question is good because, again, in this, I think I alluded to this before, multi-vehicle supervisors, those people that we designed the system for, they are kind of a mix. If you think about what they actually need to do, they're kind of a mix between pilots and air traffic controllers. And this is why when we think about what system do we need to equip them with, we're actually trying to learn from both. So we're not looking only at traditional pilots and flight decks. We're looking at that and at the systems and procedures and skills that air traffic controllers have. In fact, we have on the team people with traditional pilot experience and people with air traffic control experience. And this is not a coincidence. We were looking for people with that experience to make sure that we have both perspectives, given how similar it is to both.
There's a lot of people has those kind of experiences.
No, this is why it was not easy to find them. But yes, it's not easy, but we have them.
Okay, that's great to know. What is Wisk Generation 6? How is it different than the first 5 generations?
Yeah, so Wisk has been designing and flying and testing different generations, different concepts of eVTOL aircraft. eVTOL stands for electric vertical takeoff and landing. This is basically a term or an acronym that describes this idea where an aircraft is, first of all, electric. Second of all, it can land and take off vertically. So typically, these kinds of aircraft, they have a wing, but they can also take off and land vertically. So it's kind of a hybrid between an aircraft and a helicopter. And specifically, Wisk, again, has been testing 5 different generations or different concepts since 2010. The thing is that at the beginning, our goal was more to let's learn, let's design, let's test different concepts to basically to learn what works best, to advance technology. And while doing so, we were able to write a lot of patents. And this is, I would say, what was the idea behind the first generations. Generation 6 is different fundamentally in that from day one, our goal was not let's just learn. Our goal was let's actually certify it so we can actually fly passengers and we can build a business around it. So this is a very different thing. Now, to certify something, certify an aircraft, you have from day one to make sure that all of your processes, all of the work you're doing is done in a way that can meet very clear standards and safety requirements. And so from day one, when we started working on the Gen 6, we had to follow very specific procedures and processes. As an example, there's a way, how do you define requirements? And then how do you show that your product meets those requirements? This is just an example of how we had to think about the certification from day one. So I would say this is the big difference. And of course, the fact that we were able to collect so much data to learn so much from thousands of flight hours with the previous generations. That helps us with generation 6 because we can now implement and apply everything that we have learned.
How old is Wisk? How many years that you guys have been research developing those aircrafts?
Like I said, from 2010, I think, give or take, that's when we started testing and flying the very first generation.
So that's almost more than a decade.
Yep. Yep.
And how soon will Wisk Generation 6 be available to the public?
So that's also a good question. We're planning, so Generation 6 is now, we're working hard on making sure that it flies. And we're planning to conduct the first flight test flight, end of this year. But then, of course, as I mentioned, the certification process takes time. So we're hoping to start flying passengers by the end of this decade.
By 2030?
Not going to give you a specific date.
Okay.
But again, by the end of this decade, we have a lot of work ahead of us, and we're working hard to make sure that we're doing this fast enough, but more importantly, safe. Like safety here is number one, and everything we do has to be safe.
Were you only servicing in US or different part of the world?
So we're planning to start operations, or I should say, we're planning to get the first certification from the FAA, which is the US regulator. However, after we do that, we definitely have plans on certifying and also starting flying in other parts of the world. But the US is going to be the first place where we do that.
I look at your website. Wisk's cruising altitude is about 2,500 to 4,000 feet.
Mm-hmm.
What other aircraft flying at that altitude?
So generally speaking, if you think about which aircraft will be cruising at that altitude, we're thinking about what we call general aviation aircraft, the small, Cessna kind of aircraft, usually privately owned. People fly them a lot in the US as a hobby. So that kind of aircraft, helicopters typically fly in these altitudes. But if we're talking about flying close to big major airports, then you also have the bigger airplanes, the bigger commercial jets that will be taking off or landing. So they will be crossing these altitudes. And so when we think about one of the interesting things we're working on is what we call airspace integration. How is your aircraft, how is the Wisk aircraft going to safely integrate into an airspace where there are other aircraft flying? And so we cannot just assume we're going to fly only around small aircraft. If we're flying close to bigger airports, we also need to take into consideration those bigger jets that will be, again, crossing those altitudes.
Would Wisk be public transportation or can be a privately owned?
Our goal is to operate commercially. So basically have some kind of an airline where people can, download an app and book themselves a flight. And that's what we're planning to do. Privately owned Wisk operations, I have not heard about this yet, but this could be an idea for the future. I don't know. But right now our focus is only on commercial services. Yeah. Again, right now we're planning to have an airline that will be operating this. I'll give you just one example. The Wisk aircraft will need to be supervised by those people that I mentioned before, multi-vehicle supervisors. This requires training. This requires certification. They will need to have very specific systems. I don't see how in the foreseeable future a person would just be able to do that in a private way. So this is not the plan for now, but in the future, who knows?
Wisk Generation 6 can fly for 90 miles. How long it would take to fly that far?
Yeah, so when it depends. Depends on things like winds. I would say if you think about the fact that the aircraft is expected to fly at about 120 knots, probably I would say, and again, it depends, but could be around an hour, could be less. It depends on winds, depends on the altitude you're flying, but I would say something around those numbers.
That'd be nice because I'm sure the traffic will get worse by the time that you have Wisk in the air.
Yes, yes. One of the main motivation for us in everything we do is that we're eventually going to help people save time. So yes, traffic is already bad in many places. I don't know if it can get worse, but if it will, that's only going to make our mission more, and needed.
Since there's no pilot on board, how does the air taxi fly to the destination?
There's a lot to unpack there. I'm going to try to do it relatively efficiently and simply. So every mission begins in the planning stage, right? There's going to be a person and a system that will work together to plan missions. One of the things you do when you plan a mission is you create a route. You create a route from point A to point B. This route will include the waypoints the aircraft has to fly to, the altitudes, additional information, etc. This route will need to be, first of all, approved by the FAA or by the people and system that are responsible for approving flight plans, basically. And after that, we will have an additional step of what we call validation of the flight plan, meaning we will have additional process of automatically making sure that everything makes sense, everything is safe. If the aircraft flies its route, everything is going to be perfectly fine in terms of safety. We're not going to be anywhere close to danger, to hazard, to obstacles. The route makes sense in terms of how much battery we have, et cetera, et cetera. So after all of this, the flight plan will be uploaded to the aircraft. And the aircraft will have different computers on board that will allow it to basically navigate on its own. So the aircraft will not need, at least in a nominal scenario where everything works well, the aircraft is not going to need any human input to navigate from point A to point B. This is actually not that, crazy. Airplanes navigate by themselves today, I would say. So we're taking this technology one step further in terms of the responsibility, I would say, we give to automation. But in terms of what automation can do today, when you fly in a commercial flight, the airplane are navigating basically by themselves. In addition to that, we're going to have air traffic controllers providing us with commands or instructions in case those are needed. If this is the case, if for some reason air traffic control is asking us to deviate from the route for any reason, we will have the human on the ground, the multi-vehicle supervisor, able to command the aircraft to comply with the ATC air traffic control instructions. So that's an additional layer of safety and supervision that we're going to have. If for any reason the aircraft thinks that they need to deviate automatically from the route because of, for example, they need to avoid collision with a different aircraft, the aircraft will be able to make that decision by themselves, on their own, and do so safely. And so basically, the basic navigation capability is going to be done automatically, and we have those additional layers of safety around it to really make sure that everything is safe. Hopefully that addresses the question.
Thank you. Who would be most likely to be used this air taxi?
Okay. Hopefully everybody. What I mean by that is, so Wisk's mission is to make safe everyday flight a reality for everyone. Now, what we mean by everyone is everyone. One of the things we don't want to happen is that this will become, this premium service that only like rich people can afford. So we don't want this to happen. And so our goal, our mission, our motivation is to make it affordable. And when it's affordable, that means potentially more people can use and benefit from flights. So yes, I think everyone is the best answer I can give you.
Wisk Generation 6 can be charged in 15 minutes. How is that possible?
Yeah, so when it comes to batteries, I'm not the expert. But I think I have, so I would say two things. The first one is that batteries, the technology of batteries is progressing. I would say very significant. It has progressed. It has made a lot of advancements, and it's continuously progressing. And so the batteries today we have are much better than what we used to have a few years ago. And in a few years, I'm expecting them to continuously evolve and become much better. The second thing I would say is, at the end of the day, the reason we invest or we care about fast charging is because when the aircraft is on the ground, you want to make sure that it's ready for the next flight as soon as possible. And the charging of the battery is going to be one of those things that we need to make sure happens fast. Otherwise, our turnaround time will not be fast enough, and we will not be able to serve enough customers and to fulfill all the demand that hopefully we will have. And so this is I would say why we care about this.
Would it be safe to fly Wisk in the air during this bad weather condition?
So Wisk will have very clear rules, I would say, or procedures or guidance or limitations when it comes to weather, when it comes to wind, when it comes to rain, when it comes to icing, all those things that could potentially put the aircraft and the passengers in unsafe conditions. We will make sure that there are very clear rules of when you fly, when you don't fly. By the way, just like any aircraft, I would say the advantage or like the bonus for us is that because our routes are expected to be short, predicting the weather for the entire route is going to be an easier task for us than it is for bigger commercial jets. Because if you're flying, you know, I don't know, from across the Atlantic or something like that, like a long flight, it's sometimes very hard to predict what exactly the weather is going to be like on the other end of your route. And so a lot of times you take off and you think everything is fine, or not even fine, but it's within those limits and constraints I was mentioning before, but things change because our routes are going to be short. I'm talking about 20, 30 minutes on average. We believe that for us, in terms of avoiding bad weather is going to be a little bit of a more straightforward task because the weather in most cases should not change dramatically in 20 minutes. So we will be able to forecast and make sure, again, we avoid if the weather is not within the limitations and we think it is not 100% safe to fly, we're not going to fly. But to your question, what exactly those rules and limitations will be, it is too early to say. But this would be part of, you know, when you certify an aircraft, you have to, first of all, understand yourself and also show the regulator what are the conditions, operational conditions in which you can fly. So that's going to be part of the analysis, testing, and demonstrations we're going to do.
Is it 4,000 feet high enough that you need to deal with the turbulence?
Well, turbulence can happen, I think, in every altitude. So turbulence can happen close to the ground. It can happen high up in the air. So I don't think in this case, the altitude we're going to fly in is going to change that. But again, there are a lot of aircraft flying today at 4,000 feet. So we know that's possible. You are correct in so they're depending on geography, depending on terrain, like mountains, things like that, that could have an impact on the amount of turbulence we're going to have closer to the ground, and 4,000 feet is relatively close to the ground. And so this is one of the things we will have to, you know, to research to make sure that our routes are not flying in places where turbulence are a very frequent event that can cause a lot of uncomfortable, you know, situation for the passengers. But generally speaking, 4,000 should be, yes, should be far enough from the ground to have a safe and smooth flight. Again, if in some routes that's not possible, then maybe we're not going to fly there.
Do you know if a Wisk is affordable?
Well, we will be, because that's our mission. One of the things, so when I say that our mission is to make a safe everyday flight a reality for everyone, one of the big things there is affordability. And I think I mentioned this before. If flying with Wisk is going to be extremely expensive, then not everyone can use it. In fact, a few people will be able to use it. And again, that is against our mission. That is against what we're trying to achieve. So being affordable is definitely something we think about. This is not the main consideration. The first considerations and the biggest one is safety. But I would say after safety, the next thing we care about a lot is about scalability and affordability, that to me kind of come together, because the more you can scale your operations, the more flights, routes you can offer, probably the more affordable you can be. But again, this is very important, but this is the second consideration after safety.
Will you have more than 4 seats in the air taxi in the future?
So right now, the only aircraft we're developing and planning to certify is the 4-seat Generation 6. We don't currently have any plans for anything bigger than that. However, again, who knows? Maybe Generation 7, 8, or 9 will have more passengers. But right now, no. Right now, the only aircraft we're designing, testing, and planning to certify is the 4-seat Generation 6.
Do you know if a San Francisco Bay Area will be the first location that you're going to start Wisk?
No, I don't think we publicly announced what's going to be the first location. I mean, we did announce our partnership with the Houston area, so that's not a secret anymore that we're very interested in starting operations there. Again, I don't know if that's going to be the first place, but we want to operate in the Houston area. But to answer your question again, I don't know if San Francisco is going to be the first. I can tell you that any big city or any area where many people live and traffic is bad is going to be a very good idea for us to operate. Personally, I live in San Francisco, so whenever I go to the office, I tell myself 2 things. First of all, I really need to be good at my job because traffic is bad. And second, I really hope Wisk will operate here soon. So I think that San Francisco, the Bay Area, is definitely one of those places that seem very reasonable for a company like Wisk to operate, because again, you have many people and you have bad traffic. But I don't know at this point if that's going to be the first one.
Is it Houston has bad traffic?
I've never lived there, but I would assume so.
Tell us, where is Wisk's website and how can people find out more about Wisk Generation 6?
Yeah, so the Wisk website, Wisk Aero, you can just Google Wisk, Aero, AERO. You're going to see the website. There's a lot of information, but also a lot of updates on different either publication, different documents we release, or collaborations, partnerships. So usually it's a very up-to-date place for people to kind of learn. The second place, I would say LinkedIn. Wisk is, I think, doing a good job updating everybody on different developments. If Wisk is going to a big air show or going to a conference or has a representation in any kinds of meetings, events, usually you can hear about that there. And the information about Generation 6 is usually part of that. So you usually would hear like, hey, Wisk attended this. This is what we showed. This is something cool about Generation 6, as an example. So my recommendation would be our website and LinkedIn. I think the best 2 places to kind of keep yourself up to date with all of the news regarding Wisk.
That's great. Great information. Thank you very much, Mark. And I'm sure that would definitely want to try one of your demo, right? That's what you call. Well, thank you very much for your time. This is very informative information and hope that get people excited. And we're looking forward to Wisk Generation 6 in the air.
Same. Thank you so much.
Thank you.